Madam President.
Senator from Oklahoma.
Well, I think that's all interesting. I've heard the same thing over and over and over again, and this is only the second day, and I guess we have maybe 10 days to go. It's interesting that the junior senator from California is so interested in the fact that it's only up by 2 cents a year, and looking at the Energy Information Agency's study. What's interesting about that is the Energy Information Agency, their study presumes that we would have an additional 260 nuclear plants online. And when the appropriate time comes, I'll be asking her, remind me to ask her that question if she supports that. We have several speakers coming down. I say, Madam President, and Senator Grassley from Iowa is coming down, so I'll visit a little bit until he does get here. Then we do want to get on schedule, and I'm hoping we're going to be able to go back and forth and hear from a number of these members. First of all, let me thank my colleague from Wyoming. I don't know what he experienced this last winter, but when the senator from California talks about temperatures and all of this, it happens that we in the state of Oklahoma have sustained the worst cold spell during this last winter that we have in 30 years. And I find this to be true all over the country. You just can't have it both ways. But one of the good things about this discussion, this debate, is that we're not going to be discussing the science. I know when the senator from Massachusetts talked about the scientists in the IPCC, I have to remind my friends across America that it really was the IPCC, that's the United Nations, in case nobody knows who the IPCC is. They're the ones that started all this. They're the ones that came up. And by the way, every time there's a quote from the IPCC, it is a summary for policymakers. A summary for policymakers. And that is not, those are not, no, it won't. And that has nothing to do with scientists. So he talks about 2,000 scientists. We have a list of 30,000 scientists who have said that the relationship, yes, there can be a relationship between CO2 and a warming condition, but it's not measurable. Let me just go ahead and use as an example. This is the best example because it comes from someone that we all love dearly. Former Vice President Al Gore. Former Vice President Al Gore wanted to explain to us how serious it was way back when he was Vice President. This is in the middle 90s. And he said he hired a scientist. The scientist's name was Tom Wigley. Tom Wigley was a well-known scientist, someone who's supposed to be knowing what he's talking about. At least he was the choice of Vice President Al Gore. And when he did his study, he said, do a study. I say to my good friend in Connecticut, do a study and tell us what would happen, how much cooling would take place if all of the nations who were developed nations, not developing nations, not China, not India, not Mexico, just the developed nations, if they were all to sign on to the Kyoto Treaty and live by the emission requirements, how much would that reduce the temperature in 50 years? You know what the answer was? Do you remember that? You remember that. It was 7/100ths of 1 degree Celsius. Now, that's not even measurable. Now, of course, that's not Senator Jim Inhofe. That was Vice President Al Gore. Now, Al Gore's done his movie. Almost everything that's been in his movie, in fact, everything, has been refuted. And interestingly enough, the IPCC on sea levels and other things, scare tactics used in that science fiction movie, have been totally refuted and refuted many times by the IPCC. On the conversation we've been having on gas prices, I think it's kind of interesting because if you look at different studies, you don't want to believe studies. Look at some of the government studies. They have a responsibility to come out with something that is realistic. But if you don't want to do that, just use logic. If you are to pass a bill that has a cap on the supply of oil and gas in this country, and that cap goes into effect, by mere supply and demand, the price is going to go up. It has to go up. And so the EPA estimates that this bill, the Lieberman-Warner bill, will increase fuel costs an additional 53 cents per gallon and by $1.40 by 2050. Now, the Energy Information Agency weighed in on the same thing. They estimated that gas prices will increase anywhere from 41 cents a gallon to $1 a gallon by 2030. And while the climate bill's proponents, as we heard just a few minutes ago from the distinguished junior senator from California, argue that this shows the gas prices numbers going up by only 2 cents a year, that's assuming that we have 2.5 times the nuclear plants that we have today. That's all written down in this report. Right now we have approximately 104. That would be 260 nuclear plants. No.
Senator, yield for a question?
No, I wouldn't, not now. Then getting into the nuclear, it's one of the things I think that no one is going to argue with is you're not going to resolve the energy crisis in America unless it has a strong nuclear component. I think you're going to have some amendments coming up on this bill that will, certainly supported by Senator Warner, who's a co-sponsor of the bill, that says that we need to dramatically increase our nuclear capacity in America. Well, I've been saying that for a long time. If you look at European countries where there are not problems right now, the European countries actually, 80% of their energy comes out of nuclear energy. In our country, it's about 20%. And so I'd say any kind of a correction of this problem is not going to take place unless we have the nuclear plants. Now, the study that was referred to is one that said only 2 cents a year. That's assuming that we have an increase of 260 nuclear plants. Wildly optimistic, impossible. It can't be done. Nonetheless, that's what's being discussed. The nuclear energy is a very, very, very important part of our mix. It's going to have to be in the future. And I would say this, if I were on the other side of this bill and I were trying to get this bill passed, I would welcome the opportunity to that discussion on the nuclear amendment that will be offered by more than one person, but certainly offered by even the author of the bill, Senator Warner.